Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Olena. Yes, maybe just to do a quick. Let me just check the slides. Too much. Good. Maybe just a short introduction. I'm responsible for the RBI group, so the 14 countries in NC region, for the transformation of the IT area. And today I would like to talk to you about our lessons learned on how to modernize the technology platform and everything connected with the technology platforms, using the cooperation of external partners, but also to be able to use the external partners going forward. We recently, over the last months, but even more so, we have in the pipeline, we have been working heavily on building our own internal fintechs or solutions, but outside of our usual perimeter. And here I have two examples. Fero, which is a digital banking app we built in Ukraine for the micro customers, but also RaiPay, which is our digital wallet. I'm naming also two external solutions, Zentity and Pisano, but this is really just a drop in the ocean. And we're heavily working across all the markets with external partners. And I would say the cooperation with them really challenged us, and this was always challenging. There's a different perspective always being brought to us, but it also helped us on defining our way forward. So without further ado, I would maybe jump into to the lessons learned from this cooperation, and also how do we look at the cooperation with the external partners. Oh, and maybe a side note. I took it as a personal challenge that to try to make this presentation with a pinch of humor, because it's always difficult to talk about the IT challenges, about IT issues in a way that people will not fall asleep during the presentation. So I try to take this challenge. Good. The first lesson learned, and this might sound obvious: know what you're buying. And for those of you who represent the solution providers, know what you're selling. Why is that? Because depending if we're talking about complete banking platforms or modules building up to the overall stack, or we are talking about platform as a service, or only about front-end or only back-end solutions, there is a completely different discussions probably on both sides. But as much as, a standalone solution, we can judge on its merits, we can judge the business case behind it, we can talk about what value it brings. Then from the IT perspective, the discussion is always about, how easy it is to integrate. And the topic of integration was brought also on the earlier panel. But if we're talking about the module or a way that should be our vehicle for the modernization going forward, then the discussion much more should go into how this is simplifying our overall enterprise architecture, or is it even making it more complex? So I know that this might sound a bit vague, what I'm saying. This is quite sometimes difficult to convey a message. So on the slide, you see three examples of what someone could categorize as CBS solutions. And, on the verge, someone, can compare them as any other CBS solutions. What's the cost of maintenance? What's the gap of functionalities do we need, etc., etc. But in fact, when you look a bit deeper, these are completely different solutions. And if we are trying to compare them, then that means that we actually don't know what we're buying. And just to give you an example, Solaris Bank is really, the way we look at it is a really complete like bank in a bottle. Meaning you can use it for your greenfield setup, starting from the front end, going through the back end. You're also receiving certain operations, and even you're getting a banking license connected with that. Vodeno might sound similar, with maybe the distinction how the technology was built itself. It's built much more on a smart contract, which gives it a much better fit for the migration vehicle. So it also works great for the greenfield setups, but it's much better migration vehicle. Mambu is a pure CBS solution. Yeah? The value of it is that it's very standardized. It has a wide range of partners in the marketplace, but it's a much different use case, and it works mostly for the greenfield setups. So even though, all CBS, completely different. Second lesson learned. Think always about the solution from the wider perspective, also from IT. Because it might be the case that the value of particular solution is not the standalone complete solution, but the biggest value for you as an organization, for us as a bank, might be from the parts it's being built from. And I would say that now probably the most often used word in the RBI group is reuse. To the extent that it's on our group board level, this is a key initiative for all of our banks. And what do we mean by reuse, or what's the inspiration we are looking at when talking about reuse? There are less than 4,000 Lego pieces, yet there are almost 4 times that number of Lego sets. Going further, an average container, lifespan of an average container is 11 years, but even if that ends, it's still being utilized further. This is also a great example of how you can standardize the things, because the containers across the world are almost are identical. But you could say at this point that these are low-tech example, from the low-tech industry. But then look at the last one, because it's already from core automotive, and we cannot say that this is a low-tech already. And Volkswagen Group is making actually a great use of the reuse of its parts. And I will just give you an example. Audi TT, which is a sport car from the more premium brand Audi, versus Skoda Octavia, in 60% are the same parts. What differs is what you see on the outside. What differs is the marketing around it. But 60% of the parts are the same. And the whole idea that Volkswagen is focusing on is that when they are designing a particular component, they are instantly thinking how it can be reused across the models. And there is even something like an internal marketplace that actually all the brands can use all the same components. Skoda can use the gearbox from Lamborghini, no problem. The only thing that is pushing them to differentiate a bit is the price of those components. Yeah? And this is more a natural thing, but they are really putting an effort not on focusing how to build the best car, but how to build a best components out of which they can build a car. And this makes me think that we do see in banking that our competitive advantage is building the best solution. But while in fact it should be how we can, in an easiest, faster way, assemble a solution from already existing parts, or how can we have the best parts so later on we can be assembling best. And I wanted to back it up with some real case. So I wanted to show you our real enterprise architecture, but when I put it on the slide, nothing was visible. It was so confusing, so messy that the message would just get a bit blurry. But I left only the frame and listed the main pain points, let's say. But believe me when I say that when you look at the complete enterprise architecture, it looks like a spaghetti. So that arises a question. Why would you introduce to already a big bowl of spaghetti a smaller spaghetti in the form of solution architecture from the external provider? Especially that it also often brings its own challenges, the way it's built, the way it's coupled, the way it's integrated, etc., etc. And my answer is that it makes the great value to bring external partners, but we should always look from the perspective of how that solution not serves its own standalone need, but how it can be reused, reutilized further, either on the bank level or like in our group across the banks and the whole group. And assessing it from this perspective makes a completely different discussion. And we're just trying to make the picture simpler rather than make it more complicated, because a lot of those pain points that I mentioned earlier are coming exactly from the complexity behind all this. Going to the third lessons learned. It always takes two to tango. And when I mean two, I mean about business and IT. And at least on our organization, the lines, the competencies, the split of work between business and IT is getting blurry. And I think in truth, this is a great thing. It helps that we are learning to speak the same language, so that no longer IT is perceived as a black hole for business where the value creation is being lost. And at least on our side, what we tend to do is we always want to go on particular meetings, discussions. We always team up, as it always takes two to tango. We always do it together, so that at the very early stage we try to build and maximize the value from the external solutions, but always looking at it from the two perspectives. Not having the situation that we started the discussion, then we're involving business a bit later, and then we are facing a difficult challenges, difficult discussions later on. And this is also the recommendation I give to the representative of external solution providers, because it sounds obvious, but quite often you come to us either sending a person from IT who knows the solution great, but cannot sell the value of it, or vice versa. Going to the fourth lessons learned. Always try to decouple, and this is mostly on us, but this has also implications on the external solution providers. By decoupling, I mean try to break it down, a do-it-all system, into set of smaller services that as a whole can take the same function as this big monolith. The reason for doing this and how to do it, that's a completely different story, not even for a separate session, but that could be or is a subject for a lot of books. But why to do it is because the reuse I mentioned earlier is much more easy to achieve when we already have a microserviceable architecture, when we have components that we can more easily substitute. Replacing a big monolith, like let's take a most extreme case, a CBS, this is a nightmare. But when we're talking about particular modules, what comprises of CBS, that it's connected via APIs, that there are events built on it, etc., much, much easier. And I would say this topic is apart from the reuse, which is the overall arching principle in our group, this is probably the second most important topic we're focusing on. And I would say that we're almost allergic to any monoliths, both from the idea of purchasing them externally, but also we focus a lot on decoupling our own monoliths into smaller sets of services, of containerizing them, or replacing them later on, so that at the end we can really have a modular and scalable architecture going further. And going to the last lessons learned, and this was mentioned earlier, the study from Accenture was being quoted, and the last lessons learned is about the people. It's very hard to really change your organization, to really change your IT platform if you don't have the right skills on board. And with the current growth of the new technologies, you constantly need to work on the upskilling. We have a huge program across all the network banks on how to identify what's the skill gap and how to address it going forward. Oh, and by the way, if you're wondering what's that on the slide behind me, this is not a brain. This is actually a graph showing the event streams, which is one of the integration pattern built, I think, for Netflix or LinkedIn. One of the two. But that really shows that the emergence of new technology and how quickly it needs to reach the scale. And connected with that is the topic of culture. You cannot have a agile, nimble organization going forward if you're always so cautious about not failing. If you're going to spend months trying to address all the challenges that you might face, therefore you might even miss the opportunity to implement it. So you need to change the culture. We need to change the culture on our banks to switch it to more build fast, fail fast. Yeah? This is an easier topic, and this is why, Olena, to your point earlier, why often banks want to do POCs, because we need to test whether something is working, yeah? Before we go into the overall strategy and before we go into the full-fledged implementation. And yes, with that, I would like to thank you very much for your time, for listening to me. I hope that at least partially I managed to achieve my personal goal, that this was not too boring. I don't see too many people, falling asleep. So I hope that you found it interesting. Thank you.